Montana Territory, July 1883. The wind kicked up dust along the dry ridge as Naomi Jennings tightened the cinch on her mare, her hands trembling more than the horse beneath her. The sun had barely lifted over the Bitterroot Mountains, but already the air carried the weight of goodbye. She was ready to run again. Behind her, the small cabin stood silent, tucked between whispering pines and the wide open sky. It had been her shelter for nearly 8 months, the longest she had stayed anywhere since the night her husband disappeared into whiskey and fists, leaving her with bruises and 2 hungry mouths to feed. "Naomi," a voice called from the trail behind her. Low, steady, with a rough edge that always seemed to smooth when he spoke to her, she didn't turn around. "You shouldn't be here, Mason." "I think I should." His boots crunched on the dry needles. "Zachary told me you were saddling up." Her heart sank. Zachary, her oldest, 7 years and too sharp for his age, must have heard her moving around and run off to Mason's ranch next door. The boy had grown attached fast, and Mason Dawson never turned him away, not once. Naomi finally turned. Mason stood a few feet away, his hat in hand, his dark hair tousled by the wind. He was 33, a rancher through and through, shoulders broad from years of work, eyes the color of storm-soaked earth. And he was kind, too kind for a woman like her. "I need to go," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "It is not safe for us here." "The man who hurt you is dead, Naomi. You told me that yourself." He took a step closer. "You are safe now." "Safe?" Her laugh was short, bitter. "No place is safe for a woman who ran with 2 children and no husband. I have been chased through Wyoming, Idaho. I do not need another man's pity." "This is not pity," Mason said. "It is something else entirely." From behind the cabin, little footsteps sounded, and then Zachary appeared, holding his sister's hand. Zoe, only 4, clung to her brother, her face half hidden behind her curls. Naomi's chest tightened. She could not do this again. She had seen what happened when you stayed too long. People asked questions. Men noticed. And sometimes the past clawed its way back. "I know you are scared," Mason said, softer now, like he was trying not to spook a wild animal. "But you are not alone anymore." Naomi looked down at her children. Zachary stood tall, protective, just like always. Zoe's fingers curled around his shirt. They trusted her to keep them safe, and that meant moving on before someone came looking. "I have to go," she whispered, more to herself than to Mason. "It is better this way." Mason stepped forward, his voice low but clear. "If you go, take my heart with you." Her breath caught. He looked at her, not with desperation, not with some wild plea, but with quiet certainty. "You walked into my life last winter, and nothing has been the same since. You do not owe me anything, Naomi, but I am standing here telling you I care about you, about those kids, and I am not going to stop." Naomi's throat closed up. She had not cried in years, but there it was, hot behind her eyes. This man had shown up each week with firewood when the snows came too fast. He had taught Zachary how to saddle a pony. He had sat with Zoe when she had a fever, not saying a word, just holding her hand while Naomi boiled water and prayed. "I do not know how to trust this," she said, her voice cracking. "I do not know how to stay." "You do not have to know today," Mason said. "Just do not leave yet." Her fingers loosened on the reins. Behind her, the horse shifted, restless. Zoe tugged at her skirt, and Naomi reached down, lifting the little girl into her arms. Zachary came to her side without a word, leaning against her hip. "I was not expecting you," she said to Mason. He smiled, a real one this time, and the lines around his eyes deepened. "Neither was I." She glanced toward the cabin. It was small, patched with care, but it had held them through a long winter, and Mason had been there through it all, always close, never pushing. "I will not run," she said quietly. "Not today." Mason nodded once, slow and steady. That is all I needed to hear. She turned toward the cabin, her children close. Mason followed beside them, not touching her, not rushing her, just being there. Inside, Zachary and Zoe settled onto the rug near the hearth. Naomi stood near the stove, arms crossed, watching Mason as he leaned against the doorframe. He looked like he belonged there. "I have been on my own a long time," she said. "I know. I do not know how to be with someone. I can be patient." She studied him, this man who had quietly shown up again and again, never asking for anything in return. A man who had every reason to walk away but stayed anyway. "You meant what you said, about your heart," he nodded. "Every word." Naomi took a breath. "Then maybe I can learn to stay." Mason's eyes softened. He took a step closer, then another, until he was within reach. She did not pull away when his hand touched hers. She let it happen, let the warmth of his skin settle into her bones. For the first time in years, she did not feel like she was about to fall. She felt like she might be home. The following morning broke slow and pale, with a hush over the land that felt different than the day before. Naomi stood barefoot on the porch, arms folded against the chill that still clung to the earth before the sun had found its full strength. The forest beyond the meadow was quiet, save for the shrill call of a lone hawk circling high above the pines. She watched it wheel and dive, her thoughts as restless as its wings. Inside, Zoe's soft breathing reached her ears, steady and even. Zachary had already gone with Mason to the barn he'd left without asking, just a quick glance and a nod, like he knew she wouldn't stop him. She hadn't. She didn't step off the porch. Not yet. The land stretched wide in every direction, and for the first time in years it didn't feel like something to run from. The door creaked behind her. Mason stepped out, brushing sawdust from his sleeves. "I replaced the broken hinge on the woodshed," he said. She nodded, eyes still on the ridge. "You didn't have to, I know." She finally looked over at him. There were flecks of pine in his hair, and his shirt was damp near the collar. He'd started working before the sun had cleared the trees. "I never asked for any of this," she said. "I didn't ask either," he replied. "It still found me." She wrapped her arms tighter around herself. "What happens now, that depends on you." Naomi looked back toward the trees. "I keep thinking something will come, a letter, a rider, a voice I know too well. I can't shake it." Mason stepped down into the dirt, his boots leaving deep prints in the soft ground. "You ever plant a tree?" "No." "You dig a hole deep enough, set the roots down steady, then you cover it, pack the earth and wait. First season, not much happens. Second, maybe a few green shoots. By the third, it's strong enough to hold its own." She turned slowly. "You think I'm a tree? I think you've been running so long you forgot what it feels like to grow." Her voice came quieter than before. "And what if the soil's no good? I've worked this land my whole life. I know good ground when I see it." Something loosened in her chest, something small but real. She glanced toward the barn. "He said you showed him how to feed the mare without spooking her." Mason shrugged. "It's easier to teach a boy who listens. Most don't. He listens too hard sometimes, like he's waiting for something to go wrong. He's learning it doesn't have to." Naomi lowered herself onto the porch step, fingers curling over the edge. "I used to believe in permanence. That thing stayed where you left them, but I was wrong." Mason didn't sit. He stayed where he was, the hem of his coat catching the breeze. "You're not the only one who's lost more than they can name." She looked up at him then. My brother died in a river west of Missoula." Spring thaw took the bank out beneath his horse. "I was supposed to ride with him that day, but I stayed back to mend a fence. First year I ever hated the sound of water." Naomi's gaze dropped to the ground. "I'm sorry. I'm not telling you for sorry. I'm telling you because you're not alone in this." They sat in the quiet, the wind stirring the tops of the pines and the smell of early summer sweet in the air. Naomi's hand brushed the edge of her skirt. She didn't know how to answer the things Mason carried, only that they had weight. Real weight. "I don't know what to do with your kindness," she said. "You don't have to do anything with it. Just let it be." The door behind them creaked again, and Zoe stepped out, rubbing her eyes. She padded across the porch and leaned into Naomi's side without a word. Naomi curled an arm around her. "She hungry?" Mason asked softly. "She's always hungry," Naomi said, a faint smile tugging at her mouth. "I'll make a fire," he said. "Let her help me crack eggs if that's all right." Naomi hesitated. Then she nodded. Mason reached out his hand to the small girl. Zoe glanced up at her mother, then over at him. After a moment, she slipped her fingers into his. Naomi watched them walk back inside. The light caught the edge of Mason's profile as he stooped to speak to Zoe at her height, patient and unhurried. She leaned back against the post, heart steady for the first time in a long while. Maybe it wasn't about staying or going. Maybe it was about choosing. And for once, she didn't feel like running. The first real heat of summer settled across the valley by mid-July. A dry, golden warmth that set the tall grass swaying and sent the scent of pine resin thick into the air. Naomi rolled up her sleeves as she worked beside Mason in the garden behind his house, coaxing beans up a frame he had built from lodgepole he'd cut himself. Her hands were caked with dirt, her shoulders aching, but she didn't mind. Zachary was nearby, helping Ezra Dawson, Mason's uncle, a retired scout with a stiff knee and a sharp tongue, tack up one of the older geldings. Zoe sat under a cottonwood with a tin pail of river stones, lining them up like soldiers and humming to herself. "She's gotten louder," Mason said, glancing toward the little girl. "She used to barely speak," Naomi murmured. "Now she sings." Mason pressed another stake into the soil. "That's a good sign." Naomi nodded, brushing a strand of hair from her temple with the back of her wrist. "I keep waiting to feel like I don't belong here." He looked over at her, one hand resting on his thigh. "Do you still?" She studied the rows of young plants, the rhythm of her children's voices in the background, the quiet steadiness of this land that never asked anything of her but to stay. Less each day. They worked in silence for a while, the kind that came easy when people's hands were busy and their hearts didn't need explaining. A hawk called overhead, and Naomi paused, shading her eyes to watch it circle. Mason stood and dusted his palms on his trousers. "I've been meaning to ask you something," he said. She rested her forearm on her knee, waiting. "There's a church gathering in Hamilton next Sunday. Folks bring food, there's a fiddler, sometimes a square if enough people aren't too stiff from the week." Naomi straightened, startled. "You want me to come?" "I'd like you to. I'd like people to know you." Her mouth opened, then closed. "What if they ask where I came from?" "Let them," Mason said. "You don't have to answer anything you don't want to, but you're not a secret, Naomi." She drew in a breath. "I've never been to anything like that, not since before." She trailed off. "You don't have to dance," he said, gentler now. "You can just sit under the trees and eat cornbread." She smiled faintly. "Cornbread sounds safer than dancing." He dropped his voice slightly. "I'd still ask, though. If you'd let me." She didn't answer right away. A breeze pushed through the garden rows, lifting the hem of her skirt. She looked over at her children, Zachary leading the gelding with careful hands, Zoe now piling her stones into a little pyramid. "I used to think if I let anyone see too much of me, they'd find something broken," she said. "But you look at me like you see something whole." "I don't see what's missing," Mason said. "I see what's still standing." Naomi's throat tightened. "I don't know how to be what you deserve. I'm not asking you to be anything you're not." She glanced down at her dirt-smudged hands. "I don't own a dress fit for church. My aunt left one in the cedar chest after she passed. Might fit." He hesitated, then added, "It's pale blue. Not too fine. You keep offering me things I didn't ask for. I'll stop when you tell me to." She looked up at him again, not flinching from the steadiness in his expression. "All right," she said. "I'll come." Mason gave a slow nod, then bent to pick up the spade. "You'll need a bonnet." "Sun's been cruel lately." Naomi took the tool from him gently. "I've managed worse than sunburn." "That's not the point," he said, but he didn't push. Later, as the light softened toward amber, Naomi sat on the porch steps with Zoe asleep against her side and Zachary out back with Ezra, both of them squinting at the sky like they could read tomorrow in the clouds. Mason sat on the rail, whittling a piece of ash wood into something that looked like the start of a spoon. "Your hands ever stop moving?" she asked. "If they do, I start thinking too much." She leaned her head back against the post. "What about? Whether you'll still be here by fall?" Naomi didn't answer at once. She listened to the creak of the porch boards, the far-off murmur of a cow lowing down in the pasture. Then she said, "I've never stayed long enough to see leaves change. You could." She shifted Zoe's weight across her lap. "If I do, it won't be because I lost my fear. It'll be because I chose something stronger." Mason set the half-whittled spoon beside him. "Then choose this." "Choose us." Naomi stared out across the land, where the sun was bleeding out behind the hills. And for once, she didn't feel like she was bracing for something to go wrong. She felt like she was beginning. A slow rain came 2 nights before the church gathering, soft and steady, falling through the cottonwoods like a secret. Naomi stood at the window of Mason's house, drying the last of the supper plates as the drops traced silvery trails on the glass. The children were already asleep in the adjoining room, Zoe curled against her stuffed cloth rabbit. Zachary sprawled on his back like he'd been in mid-thought when sleep took him. Mason knelt by the hearth, coaxing a low fire into something steadier. The scent of wet earth drifted through the open upper pane, mingling with the faint smoke of juniper wood. "You ever think about where you'd be if things had gone different?" Naomi asked, her voice quiet. He glanced over his shoulder. "I used to." "Not so much anymore." She ran a cloth along the rim of the basin. "I used to think I'd be a school teacher, thought I'd have a globe in the corner and a row of slates hung neat on the wall." Mason stood, brushing ash from his palms. "You've still got time." "I don't know if I remember how to teach anything." She folded the cloth slow and precise. "I used to know things. Latin roots, state capitals, the names of stars. You remember how to raise 2 children with almost nothing. That counts for more." She turned from the window, leaning her hip against the table. "Do you ever wish you'd left Montana?" "No." He moved to the cupboard, took down 2 mugs. "I've never belonged anywhere else." She watched him pour coffee from the pot left warming by the stove. "I didn't think I'd still be here by summer." "I know." Naomi reached for the mug he offered her, cradling it between her hands. "But I am." He didn't speak, only held her gaze a little longer than usual, then set his own mug down on the table. She took a sip, then nodded toward the door. "I walked the north fence line today. It's holding, but one of the lower rails near the creek's rotted through. I'll fix it before the cattle come through that pasture. I can help. You already do." Outside, the rain deepened, a rhythm against the roof. Naomi crossed the room, lifted the bonnet from the peg by the door, and ran her fingers over the stitching. It was pale blue, just as he'd said. "You said your aunt left this behind." She was never one for lace. "Said it caught on everything but a man's eye." Naomi smiled faintly, pressing the brim into her palm. "I think I would have liked her. She would have liked you." She didn't answer right away. The rain muffled the room, made the air feel closer. She turned back to him, bonnet still in her hand. "I'm not used to being seen without being measured." "Well," Mason said, voice steady, I don't keep scales around here. She stepped closer, setting the bonnet down on the table. I'm not afraid of starting over. I'm afraid of getting it right, only to lose it again. I can't promise nothing bad will come, but I can promise I won't walk away when it does. The light from the fire caught the curve of his jaw, the faint shadow beneath one eye where the day had worn at him. Naomi felt something inside her settle, like a gate eased into its latch. I used to think I'd never have anything quiet again, she said. No safe mornings, no evenings like this. You do now. She reached out, touched his hand where it rested on the table. He didn't move, only turned his palm up, his fingers brushing her wrist. I want to stay, she said. You already are. He stepped closer, still giving her room but not retreating. The space between them held something steady, earned. Naomi looked up at him, the firelight flickering across her face. I can't promise I won't flinch. I won't ask you to. She let her hand rest fully in his, and for the first time she didn't think about leaving, she thought about planting roots. About autumn wood smoke and harvest preserves, about laughter carried in from the barn on cold mornings, about her children growing up knowing what it meant to be safe. Mason pressed his forehead to hers, his breath warm and even. Neither of them spoke. There was no need. Outside, the rain slowed and the fire crackled low. And in that small, quiet room, something stronger than fear took hold. Something permanent. The day of the gathering dawned with a sky the color of dry linen, soft, pale, untroubled, and a quiet breeze that carried the scent of wild sage across the hills. Naomi stood before the small mirror in Mason's bedroom, fingers working the buttons on the borrowed dress with slow, deliberate care. The fabric was stiff in places from age, but it fit well enough. The blue was faded, but it caught the light when she moved, and the sleeves were just long enough to hide the faint scars on her forearms. Through the open window, she heard Mason's voice guiding Zachary through the harnessing of the wagon. Ezra's deeper tone followed, offering some gruff instruction. Naomi caught no trace of urgency in either voice, only the even rhythm of men who'd done the same job 1,000 times. It soothed something in her. Zoe sat on the edge of the bed with braids freshly tied and a small daisy tucked behind one ear. "Mama," she said, watching her with wide eyes, "you look like the lady in the picture book." Naomi turned, smoothing the front of her skirt. "Do you think so?" Zoe nodded solemnly. Prettier, though, she didn't smile. Naomi crouched and pressed a kiss to her daughter's forehead. "Well, I do today." They rode to the gathering in Mason's wagon, the children nestled between them, a basket of pickled beans and oat cakes wrapped carefully in a tea cloth at Naomi's feet. The road to Hamilton curved along the west edge of the valley, where fences gave way to open pasture, and the air smelled of sun-warmed grass and old wood. At the edge of the field where the gathering was held, Naomi hesitated before setting foot on the grass. There were more people than she'd expected, families in Sunday clothes, clusters of men near the horse line, children darting between barrels and quilt-covered tables. A group of women near the water trough looked up as they passed. Naomi kept her eyes forward. "Stay close," Mason said under his breath. "I'm not going anywhere," she answered. He led her to the shade of a cottonwood near the edge of the clearing, where Ezra had already claimed a spot on a low bench with a tin cup in hand. Zachary joined a group of boys near the edge of the orchard, while Zoe clung to Naomi's hand until a girl with a ribbon in her hair offered her a piece of apple candy. Naomi watched her daughter go, uncertain for just a moment, then turned to Mason. She didn't even look back. "They never do," he said, smiling faintly. "That's how you know they feel safe." A woman approached them with a pie tin in one hand and a kerchief tucked beneath her collar. "Mason Dawson," she called, You'd best have brought something worth eating, or I swear. I brought pickled beans, Naomi said. The woman squinted at her, then gave a sharp nod. About time he brought someone with sense. She turned to Mason. You'll save me a dance later, if my knees hold, he replied. The woman winked and moved on. Naomi turned to him with lifted brows. She's been threatening me with pie and marriage since I was 20, he said. Naomi shook her head. You didn't tell me I'd have competition. You don't. The sun climbed slow, and the day unfolded in gentle turns. Fiddle music beneath the poplars, the clatter of tin plates, the scent of roast pork and molasses. Naomi sat beneath the tree and watched her children without the tightness in her chest she'd grown used to. She spoke to a schoolteacher from up near Derby who offered to lend her some primers if she wanted to begin teaching again. The woman didn't ask about her past. She only said, "We always need more patient hands." When the sun dipped lower and the music turned to a slower cadence, Mason offered her his hand. She hesitated, then rose and let him lead her to the edge of a packed dirt clearing where couples moved in slow rhythm. She wasn't sure of the steps, but he guided her with quiet confidence, one hand at her waist, the other curled around her fingers. "I'm not good at this," she murmured. "You're doing just fine. I'll step on you. Then I'll count it as luck." They moved in a slow arc, the world narrowing to the distance between them. Naomi could feel the beat of his pulse where their hands met, could see the fine lines near his eyes, the faint curve of a smile that wasn't for show. "I've never had this," she said, voice barely above a whisper. "You do now." She looked up at him, and for once there was no fear in her gaze, only something steadier. "I don't want to go back to that cabin. You don't have to. I want to be where you are." He shifted his hand slightly, drawing her closer. "Then let's build something new." They danced until the light turned gold and the children grew drowsy. Mason lifted Zoe into the wagon bed while Zachary climbed up beside her, already nodding off. Naomi settled beside them, her hand finding Mason's as the horses started forward. They didn't speak on the road home. They didn't need to. The hills stretched out around them, quiet and open, and the sky turned the color of ripe wheat. That night, as Naomi tucked the quilt around her daughter and kissed the top of Zachary's head, she didn't feel like a visitor in someone else's life. She felt rooted, even in the stillness. Mason stood by the hearth, pouring 2 cups of coffee. She crossed the room and took one, their fingers brushing. "I want to stay here," she said. "Not just in this house, in your life. You already are. I want to marry you." He didn't look surprised. His eyes softened, but his voice stayed steady. "I was going to ask after the first frost." "You just beat me to it," she smiled. Well, he said, reaching for her free hand. "Let's get you a ring that fits and find someone with a Bible who'll stand still long enough." They married a month later in the field behind Mason's house, beneath a stand of aspens just starting to yellow. Zachary stood tall at his mother's side, and Zoe scattered dried rose petals from an old tin pail. Naomi wore the same blue dress. The Dawson ranch grew in quiet ways. Naomi taught a small class in the parlor twice a week, using borrowed slates and chalk she bartered from the store in Corvallis. Zachary built a pigeon coop with Ezra's help. Zoe tended a patch of sweet peas behind the barn. And Mason, he came in every evening with his collar dusted and his hands stained from the land. And he kissed his wife like it was still the first time. Nothing about their life was grand. But it was honest, and it was theirs. And day by day, Naomi learned that love didn't need to be loud to last. It only needed to be true.